I remember the first time I felt truly out of place in the corporate world. It was my first job, a prestigious position at a big firm. I had worked hard to get there, burning the midnight oil through college, internships, and late-night networking sessions just to land this opportunity. I should have felt proud, accomplished even. But the reality of being a black woman in a predominantly white workplace hit me like a cold wave almost immediately. The first sign came in the form of a harmless comment. One of my colleagues, with a bright smile and an overfamiliar tone, said, "Wow, you're so articulate for a black girl." My stomach dropped, and I forced a smile in response, not knowing how else to react. It wasn't the first time I had heard this kind of backhanded compliment, but hearing it in a space where I was supposed to be a professional, where I expected some form of respect, stung differently. It was the beginning of a long string of microaggressions that would leave me feeling smaller with each passing day. At first I brushed them off. I told myself they were just ignorant comments, nothing to lose sleep over. I convinced myself that the best way to fit in was to be like everyone else and not let these things get to me. But over time, the small, seemingly innocuous remarks began to build up, forming a wall around me, isolating me from my peers. "Is that your real hair?" one of my colleagues asked, eyes widening in curiosity. "How do you even manage it?" Then there were the moments where I was mistakenly called the name of the only other black woman in the office, even though we looked nothing alike. "Oh, sorry, it's just hard to keep track," someone said with a laugh. Or the casual, but loaded, statements like, "You're not like the other black girls. You're different." Each time I heard one of these comments, a part of me would die a little inside. I wanted to scream, but I felt trapped. I didn't want to be seen as the angry black woman, a label that could so easily be slapped on me if I expressed even the slightest bit of frustration. I didn't want to alienate myself even further by standing up for myself. So, I stayed silent, swallowing my pain like bitter medicine, hoping that it would just go away. But it didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. One day, during a team meeting, I made a suggestion about a project we were working on. I had spent hours researching and preparing for this presentation, ensuring that I had all the facts and figures to back up my ideas. But as soon as I finished speaking, one of my white male colleagues interrupted me. He repeated exactly what I had just said, almost word for word, and suddenly, the room was buzzing with approval. "Great idea, John. That's brilliant. Let's go with that." I sat there in stunned silence, invisible in plain sight. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. My contribution was ignored until it was repackaged by someone who didn't look like me. I felt the weight of the unspoken rules, my voice, my ideas, my presence. They didn't matter as much because I was a black woman. It wasn't just about the microaggressions anymore. It was about the systemic erasure of my identity and my contributions. Every day became a battle to prove that I belonged, that I deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. But the more I fought, the more exhausted I became. I began to question everything. Was it me? Was I too sensitive? Was I imagining things? But then I realized that these experiences weren't unique to me. When I spoke to other black women in similar positions, they told me their own stories of being marginalized, overlooked, and disrespected. We were all fighting the same battle, and yet, we were doing it in isolation, afraid to speak out for fear of retaliation or being labeled as difficult. The breaking point came when I was passed over for a promotion that I had worked tirelessly for. I had gone above and beyond in my role, taking on extra projects, mentoring new hires, and consistently delivering results. But when the promotion was announced, it went to a white colleague who had joined the company 6 months after I did. He had less experience, less expertise, and yet, somehow, he was deemed more qualified. I sat in the bathroom stall, tears streaming down my face, feeling the crushing weight of injustice. I was tired. Tired of working twice as hard for half the recognition. Tired of being disrespected. Tired of pretending like everything was okay when it wasn't. I realized then that something had to change, and that change had to start with me. I could no longer afford to stay silent. I could no longer afford to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I knew that if I didn't advocate for myself, no one else would. But advocating for myself wasn't easy. The first time I spoke up about the microaggressions I had been facing, I was met with defensiveness. "Oh, come on, we didn't mean it like that," someone said, brushing off my concerns as if they were trivial. "You're being too sensitive," another added, dismissing my feelings entirely. It hurt, but I didn't back down. I had to learn how to stand firm in my truth, even when others tried to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. I sought out mentors, both inside and outside the company, who understood what I was going through and who could offer guidance and support. I also began documenting every incident, every comment, every slight, every instance where I felt disrespected. I knew that if I was going to make a case for myself, I needed evidence to back it up. With time, I learned how to advocate for myself effectively. I learned how to navigate difficult conversations and confrontations without letting my emotions get the best of me. I learned how to assert my boundaries and demand respect, even in spaces that weren't designed for me. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that advocating for myself wasn't just about me. It was about creating a better, more respectful workplace for the Black women who would come after me. I joined an employee resource group for Black professionals within the company and began using my voice to push for systemic change. We started having honest, difficult conversations about race, microaggressions, and inclusion in the workplace. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt like I was banging my head against a wall, trying to get people to see the reality of what Black women face in the corporate world. But slowly, change started to happen. We advocated for mandatory diversity and inclusion training, not the performative kind that just checks a box, but real, in-depth workshops that address the specific challenges Black women face. We pushed for more accountability from leadership when it came to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. We called for more representation of Black women in leadership positions, because we knew that true change couldn't happen unless we had a seat at the table where decisions were being made. Through all of this, I realized that advocating for yourself as a Black woman in the workplace isn't just about protecting yourself from harm. It's about paving the way for future generations of Black women to walk into workplaces that respect and value them for who they are. It's about breaking the cycle of silence and invisibility that so many of us have been trapped in for far too long. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. I wish I had known that my voice mattered, that my experiences were valid, and that I had the power to demand better. But I also recognize that the journey I went through was necessary. It taught me resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for myself, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against me. Today, I walk into work with my head held high, knowing that I deserve to be here, not because I've proven myself to anyone else, but because I know my worth. I no longer shrink myself or stay silent when someone disrespects me. Instead, I advocate for myself, for other Black women, and for a future where microaggressions are no longer tolerated, where Black women are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The fight isn't over, but I know now that I have the power to make a difference, not just for myself, but for every Black woman who will come after me. And that's a fight worth fighting. Overcoming the struggles of microaggressions and creating a respectful workplace didn't happen overnight. After hitting that breaking point in the bathroom, something inside me shifted. I knew I couldn't keep going down that path of silence, isolation, and internalizing pain. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I started by seeking therapy. It was one of the hardest but most necessary steps in my journey. Talking to a Black female therapist who understood the racial trauma I was experiencing made all the difference. For the first time, I didn't have to explain or justify my feelings. She knew the pain of being unseen, unheard, and undervalued in spaces that were supposed to be professional. Through therapy, I learned that the microaggressions I faced weren't my fault. It wasn't about me being too sensitive or too difficult. It was about a deeply ingrained system that dehumanized Black women, and I was allowed to feel hurt, angry, and frustrated by it. My therapist taught me coping mechanisms to navigate these toxic spaces. She helped me unpack years of self-doubt and imposter syndrome, things that had been quietly chipping away at my confidence. I began to reclaim my sense of self, refusing to let the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, racial biases around me define my worth. But therapy wasn't enough on its own. I needed community, people who shared my experiences and could validate what I was going through. That's when I found a group of Black women professionals in similar industries, all of whom had been through their own version of the microaggression mill, met regularly, shared stories, and strategized on how to navigate these environments without losing ourselves. These women became my sisters in the struggle and my biggest cheerleaders. They reminded me that I wasn't alone and that there was strength in solidarity. Together, we built a support network where we could lift each other up, celebrate our wins, and give each other the courage to keep going. With their help, I began to implement changes at work. I started calling out microaggressions as they happened, not aggressively, but assertively and confidently. I learned to calmly say, "Actually, that comment is inappropriate," or "Please don't make assumptions about me because of my race." It wasn't easy at first, but with each confrontation, I gained more confidence. And to my surprise, people started to listen. I found that by advocating for myself, I was opening the door for others to do the same. Slowly but surely, I began to notice a shift in my workplace environment. People became more conscious of their words and actions, and leadership began taking diversity and inclusion more seriously. I also realized the importance of self-care during this time. Constantly being on guard and navigating a workplace filled with microaggressions is exhausting. I needed to take care of myself, mentally, emotionally, and physically. That meant setting boundaries, both at work and in my personal life. I stopped overworking myself to prove my worth and started prioritizing my well-being. Whether it was spending time with loved ones, engaging in hobbies that brought me joy, or simply taking time to rest, I learned that I couldn't pour from an empty cup. I needed to recharge in order to keep pushing forward. One of the most transformative aspects of my journey was learning the art of forgiveness. Not for those who had wronged me, but for myself. I had to forgive myself for the years I stayed silent, for the times I didn't advocate for myself, and for the moments I doubted my worth. I realized that I had been in survival mode for so long that I hadn't given myself the grace to just be human. Healing meant acknowledging the trauma, but also giving myself permission to move forward without carrying the burden of guilt. As I became stronger and more empowered, I noticed a change in how others interacted with me. The respect I demanded started to manifest in my professional relationships. I no longer tolerated being overlooked or dismissed, and I made sure that my contributions were recognized. It wasn't an easy road, and there were still challenges along the way, but I had developed the tools to handle them. It was around this time that I came across the book, Beyond Microaggressions: Advocating for Yourself and Creating a Respectful Workplace for Black Women. I wish I had found it earlier in my journey, because it was a game changer for me. The book didn't just validate what I had been going through, it gave me actionable steps to take control of my situation. The authors understood the unique struggles Black women face in the workplace and broke down exactly how to advocate for yourself, confront microaggressions, and create a culture of respect. As I read the pages, I found myself nodding in agreement, feeling seen and heard in ways I hadn't before. But more than that, I found a blueprint for change. I started practicing the techniques outlined in the book, from how to calmly address inappropriate behavior to how to set boundaries without guilt. I realized that advocating for myself wasn't just about protecting my peace. It was about creating a ripple effect of change in my workplace and beyond. This book gave me the courage to keep pushing for a respectful environment, not just for myself, but for the Black women who would come after me. It equipped me with the tools I needed to turn my pain into power. If you're watching this and feeling the weight of microaggressions or the isolation that comes with being a Black woman in a predominantly white space, I cannot recommend this book enough. Beyond Microaggressions: Advocating for Yourself and Creating a Respectful Workplace for Black Women was the key to my transformation, and it could be the game changer you need too. Grab a copy